When I think of the cross, I think of the insults and the mockery that came from the crowd. I think of a painful 39 lashes and the excruciating pain from a thorn-filled crown. When I think of the cross, I think of brutal suffering and the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus willingly stepped into. You see, the greatest act of love is for the innocent to stand in place for the guilty. And that's exactly what Jesus did when he stood in place for you and me. It's what we call grace. And in a moment of grace, far beyond anything that we could ever comprehend, Jesus took on all our anger, all our anxiety, all our brokenness, all our pain, all our past, every single mistake, all our shame. He took on all the things that we try to carry, but they're just so heavy. But Jesus didn't come just to simply take those things. He came to give us freedom. Because of him, you're no longer lost to your past. Because of him, you're no longer a slave to your shame. Because of him, you're no longer a prisoner to your pain. Because of him, you're no longer bound to your sin. Because of Jesus, we can actually take these things and lay them down at the foot of the cross. See, God's love has liberated us, you and me, free to forever walk in the light of his amazing grace.
Well, good morning. Yes, as I would expect, some technical difficulties. This is a little different for me. I'm usually behind the camera, not in front of it. But I just knew what I experienced last year walking through the hourly events of Good Friday. I wanted to share it. So I appreciate those of you that have joined me at this very, very early hour on this Good Friday. You will be, I trust you'll be moved and blessed as I have and as I expect to be yet again doing this again this year. We'll be working through the book of John, chapter 18. We'll also be looking over at Matthew chapter 26. In this 4 o'clock hour, between 4 and 6, there were 2 trials that occurred. The first being the Jewish trial, and then at 6 a.m. We'll see the Roman trial. But I want to kind of catch us up. As I retired last night and laid down and just contemplating what was occurring even then. We know that Scripture tells us that they met in the upper room and Jesus basically instituted the first Lord's Supper. Additionally, he gave what we call the disciples' discord. He instructed them. He told them what was going to occur. He told them what they were to do. And then from there, he washed their feet. All this occurring in the evening last night. And then, as we know, Judas betrayed him. And Jesus told him, go and do. And he left. After dinner, they went to the garden, and this was probably somewhere in the 9 to 10 o'clock hour last night. And they went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And there we know, the Bible tells us that Jesus went to pray and asked the disciples to stay with him. And of course they fell asleep. And he came back and kind of got on to them for falling asleep. And then we know around midnight, Judas returned with the Roman and the officials from the priest, and they arrested Jesus. And so we're going to pick up in John chapter 18, beginning in verse 12, and see the occurrence that happened then at the arrest. So the Roman cohort, the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him and brought him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews that it was in their best interest for one man to die in behalf of the people. And we see here in verse 15, Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple, and we know that's John, of whom we're reading. Now the disciple was known to the high priest, and he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the outdoor. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave woman, who was the doorkeeper, said to Peter, "You are not also one of the man's disciples? The man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves. And Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple area, where all the Jews congregate, and I said nothing in secret. Why are you asking me? Ask those who've heard me what I have spoken to them. Look, these people know what I said." But when he had said this, one of the officers who was standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So between 4 and 8, there are two trials. The first is the Jewish trial. And as we just read there, Jesus was taken to Annas. Now Annas was the former high priest. He was like the high priest emeritus, as you would say. And he questioned Jesus about his claims to be the Son of God. In essence, they're looking to get him for blasphemy. So what we see in John 18, 12 through 27 is Jesus is in his darkest hours, and beginning with his arrest, his disciples abandoned him, except Peter and John. He was awake all night. Most of us slept last night, or sorta. And then we see here as well that Peter denies him 3 times. So he's taken to Annas, and he's questioned about the accusations. And we see in verse 20 and 21 that Jesus replied to the question, "I've said nothing in secret. Everything I've said has been in the synagogues and in public. And those who have heard me, just ask them. Ask them." You see, the Jewish law required witnesses to convict someone of blasphemy. And so Jesus is saying, hey, go ask. And we'll see. If you would, look with me real quick over at Matthew 26. Matthew 26 and verse 27. Matthew 26, beginning in verse 57. This is when Jesus is brought to Caiaphas. Now, Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas is the current high priest. Annas sent Jesus on to Caiaphas. And he has to do that because only the high priest can send someone to Pilate for sentencing. So Annas was finished. He sent him to his son-in-law, Caiaphas, who was the high priest. And we pick that up in Matthew 26 and verse 57. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were gathered together. I want to stop there for just a second. This is somewhere between 4 and 6 in the morning. That's early. Verse 58, but Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and came inside and sat down with officers to see the outcome. Now the chief priests and the entire council kept trying to obtain false witnesses against Jesus so that they might put him to death. These guys got together real early. I mean, this is the Sanhedrin, the council, together that early in the morning. They did not find anything, even though many witnesses came forward, but later on two came forward and said, this man stated, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. The high priest stood up and said to him, do you offer no answer for what these men are testifying against you? But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, I place you under oath by the living God to tell whether you are the Christ, the Son of God. He just put Jesus under oath under Jesus. He had no idea what he was saying. But anyway, he said, okay, Jesus, by putting you under oath of yourself, tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him in verse 64, you have said it yourself, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robe and said, he has blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? See, you have now heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They answered, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and beat him with their fist, and others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is the one who hit you? It's been a long night. It's been some very dark hours. And now we see how he's being treated by these who pre-planned an illegal trial. You see, when you go back and look at John 11, 47 through 58, you'll note that Caiaphas said, look, we got to offer up a man. We've got to offer somebody up, else the Romans are going to take over everything. We've got to deal with this. This whole thing was pre-planned for days. Judas was just a piece of the puzzle, but it was all pre-planned. And you'll see that if you go back and look at John 11, 47 through 58 or 53. What struck me about this is the Sanhedrin, their position, their power, and the money involved. is what drove them. So Annas sends Jesus to the current high priest, that is Caiaphas, his son-in-law, because he's the only one who can send him on to Pilate to be sentenced. That's what's occurring in this hours. So just a quick wrap, the lessons I see, and I'm sure they're copious more. We're to speak the truth to anyone who may question us. You see, we're really not threatened where we live here in the States. But so many countries, there's a penalty. So always be ready to speak the truth to anyone who asks. And we can expect the deck to be stacked against us. That's even today we see that more and more. It's more and more evident. And the root of this, again, I believe it has a lot to do with people's position, their power, and the money involved. But we can ask ourselves this question. Can we be accused of proclaiming Jesus? Can you be found guilty? Not for blasphemy, but for proclaiming what you believe. Jesus proclaimed. He did nothing in secret. He said, look, there's witnesses that will attest to what I've taught and who I am. We ask ourselves, are we willing to be persecuted and falsely accused? You see, this world will stop at nothing, even legally, to suppress the gospel. And we know Satan's behind it. It's all about deception, deceiving mankind in a multitude of ways. But here's what's reassuring. Though Jesus was awake all night, even now, he's still awake. He never sleeps. He's always there. As I woke up three times during the night, anticipating technical difficulties right on the front end, it's no surprise. As I was anticipating starting this walk with you all today, I was just reassured to know, hey, he's awake. He's always there, always listening, always ready to reassure us that he is there, he's in control. Oh, okay, my 5 to 10 minute has become 20. I would encourage you to just consider the events of this hour. I'll return at 6, promptly at 6, hopefully no problems. And we're going to look at the Jewish trial. Excuse me, we just did that. We're going to look at the Roman trial and see Jesus taken to Pilate and into Herod and then back to Pilate. And we'll see there's some good application in that as well. So thanks for waking up so early. Go grab yourself some more coffee. Enjoy the next hour and a half, and I look forward to connecting with you again at 6 o'clock. Thank you.